Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome to the next iteration of the Climate and Coordination RCast. We are very happy to have a guest with us this week, and we have lots of different topics to get through. So first, we wanted to say hello to our guest today, which is John Grant. John, hello.
Hello, Nora. Thanks for inviting me on.
Of course, yeah. Before we get started, would you like to just give our audience a little summary of perhaps what you're working on and how you came to RChain?
Sure. I founded a business in 2004, which essentially is a data business that tracks the UK job market. So we look at how skills change over time, the demand for skill sets, and salary benchmarking. Now, what that's given me is an insight in how rapid the change has been in digital and the challenges people that work in that industry need to reskill and keep up with the latest developments. So I can see that lifelong learning needs to become the norm, not the exception, not just in IT or in tech, but across all industries. AI automation is coming down the line much faster than people realize. My interest in decentralized is because I'm ambivalent about the current generation of social media, which I'll possibly come on to later on. And I think decentralized platforms is where people will collaborate and where lifelong learning to some extent will happen. It's kind of, think about open source development and think about hacker culture, but then applying that to all levels of research or collaboration, or what I've labeled it is topic hacking. And the current generation of social platforms don't have the bandwidth to be able to offer that. They are based on unsustainable business models. They are protected by Section 230. They are essentially attention merchants. They're not really the place for learning. They are, I think, causing polarization, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world. And I think it's come to a kind of point over the last few weeks that's got me really interested in and why I think I've been invited here today. So I hope that makes sense. I'm rambling a bit, but I'd like to get back to this once I get a chance to talk later on.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's really relevant to a lot of the discussions that we often have on this call. And also, I feel like your predictions are already coming true with the boom of TikTok, which is largely kind of a how-to, let me show you how I did it, let me show you how I made it kind of platform. So we can definitely talk more about that. But I definitely have two articles for today that we can start off with that I thought would be relevant, and they definitely tie into your background. So the first one, these are both from the Environmental Defense Fund blog. If anybody is not not familiar with the Environmental Defense Fund blog, they have a great little publication that is it's called blogs.edf.org, and they have a lot of really great environmental stories there. So I highly recommend anybody to check those out. Here's the first one of today. This says, the headline here is Federal Reserve warns of financial risks from climate change. Agricultural banks must act fast. This is from January 12th of this year. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit about what's going on, especially in the agricultural industry. Of course, we've talked about this several times before, but banks are starting to basically align their portfolios with much more ambitious climate goals, which is a really good thing. And of course, the Federal Reserve is basically, and other organizations are basically saying that in order for markets to continue, we need to start basically disclosing climate risks within stocks and other entities and businesses so that people really know what is going on. But I'll just read a little bit from this because this piece was pretty shocking to me. It says the major flooding that took place across the Midwest in 2019 demonstrated the financial vulnerabilities of the farm financial system to acute climate impacts. Following the devastation to crop production brought on by floods, the portion of the region's agricultural loans that are reporting, quote, major or severe repayment problems reached its highest level in 20 years. So basically that means that people are not able to be financially solvent when they're experiencing these really severe climate disasters like we saw in the Midwest of the United States with flooding. But it gets even a little crazier. It says another financial climate risk assessment conducted by an anonymous bank in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative found that by 2040, which is only in 19 years, a business as usual emissions scenario could cause revenues for the bank's agricultural borrowers to drop by 12 to 22% and cause the bank's agricultural loan defaults to increase by 10 to 15%. And it says just one final thing here. This is especially worrisome as nearly half of all U.S. agricultural loans come from lenders with at least 1/4 of their portfolios made up of debt to farm operations, presenting concentrated exposure to losses from severe weather events. So basically what we're looking at here is another potential financial bubble which could burst, but instead of the housing market, we could say it's the agricultural market because of the risks of climate change. But I would even say this is probably one very small portion of a much larger sort of climate bubble, because we know that the agricultural industry is only one sort of sector within probably hundreds of sectors that are to be expected as being highly interrupted by the next decade, 2 or 3, certainly within our century. And I just want to remind everybody of this default rate, this default risk of 10 to 15% in 19 years, and this could be the low end, we don't know. If this is accurate, I remember that the housing crisis in 2008 in the United States, I believe the defaults, like everything really started to slide at like 8 or 9%, I think. If anybody knows about that, they can correct me. So this would be like a cataclysmic, situation. So I would love to know if anybody has any comments on this. And I also have a second story which really ties into this, but I would love to hear any comments on this first one, if there are any. Oh, Steve Ross Talbot is here too. Hi, Steve. I didn't say hi to you before.
Hi, Nora.
Hello. So, okay, so I guess I'll just move on to the second story because it really ties in to the first one, but it also, I think this is a cool potential use case for a blockchain to potentially help solve some of these impending climate bubbles, financial bubbles. And hopefully, of course, it's not all about finances, but to actually help save the planet. So this is the second article that I found. This is also from the Environmental Defense Fund blog. Again, I really recommend that people check out the blog on their website because it's very good. This is actually back from October of 2020, but I still think it's pretty relevant. So it says here, the headline is "Keeping Food on the Table When Water is Scarce is a Balancing Act. This new app will help." So basically, there's a new app that is being developed called OpenET, like as in E.T. the alien. It says here that ET stands for Evapotranspiration. Okay, I've been practicing that. Evapotranspiration, which basically is the opposite of rainfall. It's how much evaporation off a land surface goes back into the atmosphere. And there's an app that is being developed that basically can monitor this very closely. And it says, when incorporated into irrigation, scheduling, or other farm management tools, this data will enable farmers to make more informed management decisions, create more accurate water budgets, and maximize their, quote, crop per drop. So basically, this is an app that gives extremely specific, unprecedented level of data to farmers and other people involved in agribusiness. And it allows them to basically save water and to help their crops survive different weather conditions because they have better data. So obviously this is an app that's going to be really important in the future. It says, despite its clear value, only about 7% of US farmers have been able to use ET data to manage irrigation. That's from 2018. I think 7% is actually pretty high, even though it's 3 years ago, 3 years ago. But it says OpenET will give all farmers across the Western United States access to ET data that can benefit their bottom line. So, I mean, this is just like a really interesting report. I recommend anybody read it. And I wanted to bring it up because I thought this app called OpenET is like a great use case for what we always talk about on this call, which is blockchain combined with climate solutions, combined with really important coordination efforts. So anyway, you guys can, anybody listening on the call can look this up and check it out and see if there might be a way to plug blockchain into this. So any comments on that one?
Interesting find. Because I never thought of Googling for this until you raised this topic. So I just Googled for water and blockchain. And quite high on top of the list is a thing called, I think it's waterchain.io or something like that. And it's a blockchain for helping people secure water supply.
Yeah.
And
Wow,
making sure
great.
that it's of high quality. So I think it's I think it's called waterchain.io. And it's very recent. It's only last year, late last year. So
Yeah.
so it's kind of an interesting, when you think about us with our green climate agenda, it does suggest that actually we should perhaps be more actively looking for things like Waterchain and the ones that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, obviously we discussed this a few weeks ago, but now the water futures are being traded on the stock market, or they will be if they're not already. They just got approved for that. So water is going to be a big deal. And, water is tied to so many jobs. And obviously you need water to live, but also a lot of economies depend on, well, I would probably say every economy depends on water, but especially certain ones, like farming and agriculture, especially. So, yeah, I agree that there's a lot more research that we could do about that, because that's going to be an extremely, a little pun here, it'll be a hot topic, that's for sure. Okay, well, maybe we want to bring our guest John in at this point, because John, I know that you have some experience with jobs programs.
Okay. If I share my screen.
Absolutely, yeah, we would love to see what you have for us.
So I hope you can see that. What it is a Wardley Map, and I don't want to be distracted by what a Wardley Map and what it means, but I hope by the time I've finished, it will help me explain some of the thoughts and ideas that I have. So a Wardley Map is essentially a value chain, which is represented on the y-axis. And what's important are anchors. On this one, just to confuse you, I've got two, which are hackers and users. What's different about a Wardley Map is the x-axis, which represents evolution, not time, evolution. It is impossible normally to determine how long things take to evolve. They have to go through multiple components, need to go through multiple diffusion curves, and the types of evolution, or the stages of evolution, can vary depending on the context of the map. So they can be activities, practices, data, knowledge. So on this map, I've got concept, emerging, convergent, accepted. This map really is to try and introduce why I'm interested in decentralized platforms and compare that to what we have today, which is the first generation, or the current generation, of social media platforms. As I've mentioned before, they are attention merchants, again, my opinion. They're protected by Section 230, and they're using Adtech, unsustainable, built on centralized closed platforms. And they encourage, I think there is plenty of evidence to show this. It's not universal, but they encourage slactivism, which is polarization, homophily, dopamine addiction, groupthink, whatever. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on that side of things. Probably what I'm trying to do is run through the map so it hopefully makes more sense. Now, if we look at the left-hand side, the hackers, the decentralized platforms, the open, this is where I see where RChain and Roland live. And decentralized platforms are the enablers of lifelong learning. Now, not lifelong learning because that we can get that from books, or we can get from online courses, or we can go and study in universities, and the list will expand. What I'm interested in is actually learning in the open. So it's bringing in the notion of hacker culture, where you are working on hackable systems that aren't inherently insecure, but they lend themselves to technical tinkering, modification, creative problem solving, adaptation, forking. And hackable also applies to algorithms, machine learning, and deep learning models. As I mentioned in the introduction, there is an urgency, I believe, that lifelong learning needs to become the norm rather than the exception. Now, where is the motivation for this to happen? What will be how will the components on the left-hand side of the map evolve to become convergent or accepted? And you can see I put a red line at the bottom of participatory inquiry and active learning. And that will evolve as a consequence of the value chain that's for hackers. So the advantage the hackers will have is firstly, pervasive computing, hyperconnectivity, and the integral income generating potential of decentralized systems will actually impact the flow of knowledge. So the diffusion effect and the bandwidth effect will increase the marginal utility of decentralized platforms per unit of time. Now that's a bit of a mouthful. I've memorized that, but what I'm saying is that more energy needs to be applied by hackers to build the platforms that will sustain them, rather than the lean back users of today of the current generation of social media platforms. So obviously they become stakeholders in the systems that they build. And I'll loop back on this in a minute to elaborate on what I mean by that, because I know it's not clear. What I would like to do is move forward to where we are at the moment, I believe. And these maps I put together over the summer. And this one is looking at what I started to think about is what's different in the technological landscape of the protests of 1968 and today, or the summer of 2020. Now, history doesn't repeat itself, it often rhymes. But what is different is hyperconnectivity, AI, automation. Another key factor, I think, is the move from, and this has been a gradual move over possibly centuries, is governing in private to governing in public. Now that's key to this map. And if you look down the value chain, you can see that I get to accountability, which then has a pipeline of policy. But the other component, which is in the accepted space of the map, are time constraints. And I think what the COVID pandemic has shown is that governments, not only in the US, and obviously I'm not based in the USA, but in the West in general, doesn't have the technological infrastructure to handle the characteristics of big data. So by that I mean volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. So governments are struggling with the complexity of dealing with messaging in the era of mobile social networks, hyper-partisanship of civil servants, and the general huge stream of low signal to noise chatter. So the other aspect to this map, which is also key, is the inevitability of central bank digital currencies. We know that the Chinese are quite advanced in testing and almost ready to launch their central bank digital currency. There are also news reports in the US, I'll put the links in the chat, of the Fed researching central bank digital currency, and possibly signaling to the private sector that they need help to build this. Linked to digital currencies also is identity. Now, when you start to link all these together, you can start to see what on the map is labeled a virtual technology stack. So we've got support through artificial intelligence, automation, hyperconnectivity, CBDC. Again, that value chain needs to be expanded to demonstrate what I actually mean. But for the purpose of this conversation, I hope it's sufficient. But what that will support is the notion, or what will be sold as, governing in public. And I've given it a subtitle there of technocracy. Now, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and it is serious. And it's also shown the differences between the way the West has handled it and the way it's been handled in places like Taiwan, China, Singapore, etc. There's going to be economic consequences. You don't need me to say that. How deep the depression will be, nobody knows. If you look at the appreciation in value of Bitcoin over the last 3 months, that may be an indicator of where the market believes fiat currencies like the dollar, the pound, the euro are headed. So given this infrastructure and I need to add something else here to make my point, but I need to tread carefully with what I say. But the other premise that this map was built on is an electoral shock in the November 2020 US election. Now, we know who's won the election, but as an observer on the other side of the pond, it wasn't a decisive election win. And I'll just compare it to Brexit. It was the winners and the losers, it kind of tended around 50%. So,
well, in America, that's pretty typical, and Joe Biden won the 2020 election by very similar margins that Donald Trump won the 2016 election, which was also seen as pretty decisive. In fact,
sure.
Donald Trump called it a landslide in 2016.
Sure, I'm not disputing that. That's not the impression I'm giving. The disputing that what the actual result is. What I did anticipate is that there would be, it wouldn't be straightforward. And as we've seen with the storming of the Capitol, the second impeachment of Donald Trump, it hasn't been straightforward. Similarly as it was with Brexit in the UK, the Brexit vote in the UK.
Well, it is straightforward, but there lies being told by people to make it seem like it's confusing, but it's not really confusing at all.
Sure, but I think the point, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the point you're making here, I mean, I'm from the UK, so well aware of how it works in the UK and in the US. When you look at the number of electoral college votes, excuse me, shouldn't have swallowed that water. When you look at the number of electoral college votes and look at that as percentages versus the percentages that voted for Trump, as distasteful as he is, versus Joe Biden, who I particularly like, but I like several others as well, it isn't reflected in what we call a landslide, but actually wasn't. In the same way that Boris Johnson ends up with an 80-seat majority, but actually the percentage votes between him and the Labour Party at that point were not, they're not aligned to that level of power that's afforded them.
Yeah,
and that's just to do with that's to do with a representative democracy that doesn't have proportional representation.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It inflates one party and deflates another,
Right. Yeah,
regardless of your vote. And not all votes in this instance are equal. If you're in Alaska, your vote counts more.
Right. Well, and sure, and the fact that
Just-
a state like California has 2 senators and a state like Wyoming has 2 senators is totally insane. But anyway, John, go ahead, continue.
I just wondered, John, was that what you were pointing out effectively?
I'm mindful that I'm on, this is risky ground, especially for somebody who isn't an American to be commenting on this.
It's not risky. I just wanted to make clear, that people are confused for a reason.
I'd rather be talking about something else, if I put it like that. But what I was trying to think about back in the summer is that when the election was uncertain, it wasn't clear that there was going to be one winner or the other. It was kind of, we were heading into uncertainty, and I hope that makes sense. But we're at a point where it's clear things are moving forward, but with I'll leave it at that. I hope that makes the point. Now, if I go back to the map, which shows there's an arrow that's showing governing in public evolving to convergent. So whether it was Democrat or whether it was Republican, it didn't matter for this map, because the map itself, it doesn't matter which political persuasion is in government to make this the concern, I suppose, that I'm raising here. And it's linked, it will link back to decentralized systems or services later on. But in order to deal with governing in public, there needs to be systems in place that can message in real time. So this is where the time constraints tie back into accountability and governing in public. Talking to other people, that when the recession does kick in and the virtual technology stack is in place, so they've started to roll out the CDBC, there's nothing to stop governments then rolling out other, and I'll use inverted commas, free digital services to support the economy through this period. And climate change is another thing that will be part of this recovery. So I'm going to say this clearly now: a technocratic government, whether that's Republican or Democrat, promising radical high-tech approaches to tackling climate change and handling the recovery of the economy, I believe will be difficult to remove from office once in power. Now, if I finally loop back to what I was talking earlier, which is the thing that interests me and why I think that the ecosystem of decentralized technology and systems out there is topic hacking. So this map, the anchor is clearly labeled agent. So that can be either a human or it can be some kind of smart contract.
Are you, oh, sorry, I couldn't see your screen. It just went black. So now I can see it. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. The collaboration platform and the bridging is key here. So this is where I see the RChain Rolang existing. And what it will enable is many different platforms that focus on different issues, contexts, solving different problems. And it's understanding network theory, weak signal detection, and looking for weak links. So current generation of social media platforms kind of build hierarchies. Hierarchies do exist in complex adaptive systems. They are inevitable. But what I'm hoping is for topic hacking to evolve, so for it to move right on the map, what we will need are platforms enablers to do that, are decentralized platforms that offer bridging, weak signal detection, and being able to seek out weak links. So working with groups from all over the world. Now, I'll finish on one last point, and I'm not deliberately trying to be controversial here. What I'm hoping to understand from this conversation is where you think RChain fits into this and how people will benefit from RChain for learning in the open. But I hope you're all familiar with H.G. Wells. He wrote The Time Machine in, I think it was 1890.
Yep.
Or he also drafted the Rights of Man. It was a kind of human rights manifesto. And that was the basis of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So obviously interesting, clever, and influential. Going back to the Time Machine, given the actions that AWS, Amazon took on the January the 10th, which to me highlights the precautions now of relying on public cloud. If you had a time machine and you traveled forward in time, will AWS have evolved to be the Morlocks or the Eloi? I hope that makes sense. I'll finish that.
Well, thank you for that.
If you wanted an answer to that.
Yes.
Thank you for that presentation.
Okay.
I just wanted to. You've said a lot of stuff that's very that deserves many hours of discussion. But I want to be just as controversial and point out an analogy that I think it illustrates the problem with putting too much faith in hacker culture. I mean, I love hacker culture, and I love when people wake up to their present moment and realize that they can hack it. But by the same token, without additional support for around psychopathy, trauma, and other kinds of things, I believe that there's a straightforward analogy between the way Hitler and Goebbels hacked the media of their time, which was just emerging, and the way Trump hacked media in the governance context. It's almost a straight transformation from one era to another. Trump was able to get around the existing media machines using the modern media machines for a very long time, and his hacks were not very pleasant. His hacks of those machines were resulted in a lot of damage to many sectors of society and governance itself. And so just because we enable hacking and we wake up people to the possibility of hacking their present moment, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have good outcomes.
I can appreciate that, but I'll push back, if I may, is to say that governing in public or governing in real time is the equivalent of hacking as well.
Well, I guess my argument is that Trump, I think many view Trump as pushing towards governing in public, right? He fired people on Twitter. He launched military programs on Twitter even before generals knew about it. So it was happening. It just it wasn't happening in a pleasant way.
But isn't there a difference between what he's talking about, which is governing in public, which is like sounds more transparent, and governing with like no council, what do you call that? Like, I guess autocracy, but like, isn't it possible to govern in public also using the people around you to make legitimate decisions?
Well, this was my point exactly. My point is that we have to add more to the mix than just hacking and governance.
Right. Yeah.
Because there is because autocracy is a form of governance. It's just not one that we really want to head towards, I hope. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think from a human species perspective, because I've been troubled about what's happened with Trump and the fact that 74 million people even voted for him, and troubled that people in the United States could actually think that storming the Capitol building somehow is legal. And you guys know me, and John, you don't know me, but I'm a big supporter of digital democracies that decentralize governing ourselves in some way. And I'm a big supporter of technology that can enable that. And I worked with the Labour Party on the digital manifesto when Corbyn and McDonald were in power, were running the Labour Party. And for all of the bad things about them, the good things I'll say about them is that they truly believed in this notion of the importance of the individual, but also believed believed actually is a good word, had faith in basic humanity's ability somehow to collaborate. And what I've found, so on the one hand, being a subscriber to that sort of leads me to believe that the future is not just governing in public, and it's probably where you're heading. It's the decentralization of that, so that there's participatory involvement, and that you can make statements on some platform that contributes to the making of a policy, and you can ask that policy, did you incorporate my sentiment? And it should be able to tell you both that whether it did or it didn't, and how or why it did or it didn't. That's the sort of utopian future. But such systems do exist. Polis was one that tried to do it, but it was centralized. If that same Polis machine existed wholly on chain, and with the ability to have provenance with deliberation, which we already have with RChat, and the ability to vote with RVote comes about, the challenge is not so much can we do it technically. We know we can. We're almost there on RChain already. And with a chain that scales, it potentially could take a whole country and wider. So we can anticipate the ability to do that. The real challenge, I think, is how the hell do you launch it? And I've been playing with that for months and months and seeing what's gone on in the States and feeling sort of profoundly depressed into my fellow man's ability to trip themselves up or shoot themselves in the foot. But still, I'm still unwavering in my belief in some notion of common humanity that will enable us to collaborate in the right way across the planet, not just in our nation states. And I think the whole notion of digital democracy, as it goes into a wider participation, then calls into question the role of the representative who we elect. What is their role? Because their role will shrink, or at least if we don't think of it shrinking, it becomes very accountable every minute of the day. So, I just wanted to sort of put that out there, that I think it's the decentralization of that government and governance in public that's required. And then we move into a new era in which both collaboration locally and collaboration across disparate distances becomes something that we learn to do over these platforms, because we don't know how to do it yet as people, as humans. Full stop.
Well, I want to bring in one more angle here and then give John a chance to respond. So many people have heard me say this, and I think I'm sort of responded to with a deafening silence when I talk about these things. But I think that they are there's a growing there's a clear growing record that something like this is already happening, sort of in its shadow form. So I think many people have heard the term now conspirituality, where a lot of the QAnon and other kinds of conspiracy theories they merge with sort of very lazy spiritual narratives. In the sense that the narratives about spirituality are not subjected to the kind of rigor that we would expect of scientific or mathematical disciplines, and so a lot of people get sucked in, and that's very problematic. But by the same token, I have been urging and arguing that we do need the development of a layer of technologies, which I call the spiritual technologies, over and above the bytes and bits. That what ultimately what you want for your representative is conscience. You want the representative to not necessarily go out, but to go inward. Can you consult your own conscience? And is there a real relationship, a viable relationship between your experience of conscience and everyone else's experience of conscience, and most importantly, to the experience of the collective, the wisdom of the collective, which is again a real thing? Is there a relationship between your own inner experience of consciousness and the collective wisdom? And the development of that, there's millennia of technologies that have real objective approaches to the development of that experience, so that it can be relied upon. But until that is developed, I think every time we build bits and bytes towards unity, it will always fall prey to the Tower of Babel narrative. Already, the internet is a modern day metaphor for the recapitulation of the Tower of Babel. The intent of the internet, the intent of the World Wide Web, was to bring us together, to make it possible for us to have access at our fingertips to a wide range of knowledge and wisdom. But what has happened without these technologies, these other kinds of technologies of conscience, is that it has become a web of lies. It is as divisive and corrosive to society as anything we have built. And so my argument is that we're going to have to bring in these other technologies, and do so in a different way. It can no longer be lax. It can no longer be without an experiential basis. It can no longer be without rigorous testing, confirmation, and aggregation or accumulation of collective wisdom. Anyway, that's my soapbox, and then I'll turn it over to to others.
Yeah, I would say, if I could, if I can kind of grasp what John is getting at, which, like you say, is so much to parse out. But when you talk about lifelong learning, I think, I don't think that John, you're talking, if I can put words in your mouth, you're not talking about hacking as a concept. You're talking about a particular kind of hacking, a hacking that focuses on the concepts of lifelong learning. And I always go back to the Lawrence Lessig guide of how society is controlled. So, there's 4 ways to control behavior in a society: law, market, architecture, and norms. And so, if I'm understanding your approach, John, it's not hacking per se, it's how we hack and why we hack. And that lies largely in the norms and the architecture.
Yeah, there's I was thinking about how to respond, because I've got so much to say, but I want to focus on lifelong learning, because that's what motivates me to research this. And when I do discuss this with people I'm not familiar with, that the term hacking does have connotations, and maybe I should try and look for a different term. But I do appreciate all the input. Now, on a final note, then, to listen to what the comments that have been made, and to weave in the importance of lifelong learning, and the bit that interests me, or what I hope we'll see, is learning in the open. Learning from each other, learning through by making mistakes and not being ridiculed for that. But the radicalization that was talked about is interesting, because you can see that what Amazon did is possibly what governments are not able to do at the moment, which is deradicalization. So credit card companies can withdraw their services, and a nefarious service can be kind of taken off the internet. So it's governing in the open by mega tech or mega corporations. The other thing that was touched on, I believe, was culture. And that's the area I'm looking at the moment. I'm reading a book by Joseph Hendrick, I believe. It's called The Weirdest People in the World. And WEIRD is an acronym which stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And what he talks about there is that Westerners, the makeup of our brain is such that the alphabet that we use kind of, I wouldn't say causes, but it makes us think linearly, which is no good in complexity. Cause and effect. Weird people tend to be sorry, my mouth's not working, non-conformist, analytic, and control-oriented. We tend to see ourselves about how we fit into the world, our achievements, rather than our network, our family. Now, if you look at China, the language that they use, the alphabet, they actually think differently. So if we need to collaborate with people from different cultures, how are we going to be able to do that? And on the first slide, which was topic hacking in the knowledge economy, I included a few components which were trustless economies, which is, blockchain may fit in there. Dynamic governance, whatever that means. So it's still a concept at the moment. We don't really know how we're going to govern in either a hacker culture or whatever culture we mean when we're talking about how do we learn in a rapid, technologically evolving world. Full stop.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a discussion that we could definitely have again or many times. But unfortunately, we do have another call in 2 minutes. So I'm not sure if anybody has any final burning comments that they want to add.
No, just thank you very much, John, for coming. It's been a delight. Very educational.
Yes, thank you, John. We really appreciate it, and yeah. So we will be back next week, of course. If anybody's interested in becoming a member of RChain, they can do that at rchain.coop. Please subscribe to RChain on YouTube and follow the co-op on social media. And if you're interested in becoming a guest or know someone who might like to be a guest on the RCAST, just email at rchain.coop. And thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.